Thank you so far, our presenters. So now we're changing gears. We're getting into the segment about the Linux Foundation. And to get us started on those three presentations before the break is Mike Dolan, who is Senior VP at the Linux Foundation in charge of projects and many other things. Please welcome Mike Dolan.
Thanks, David. This group has grown. The last time I talked to a group from the Academy Software Foundation, it was a much smaller crowd. I was asked to talk about opportunities in open source. Opportunity, a favorable juncture of circumstances. We had an opportunity that showed up a long time ago, back in 2017. If we take a time back, I looked a lot younger. No visual effects required to show this picture. This was actually one of the slides we used at that time. And I'm going to go through a few of these slides real quick, but these were slides we used as we were bringing and convening a bunch of people who saw a number of circumstances that were coming to a head around open source, around the visual effects pipelines, around the work, the constraints on the industry, the efficiency being asked for, and said maybe open source can be part of the solution. And so we did what more or less a consulting group does. We came in, we talked to a bunch of people, a bunch of experts in the space. We looked at some of the data, and then we came back and told you all exactly what you were already telling us. But because we were saying it, it seemed like it was a little bit different of an idea, I guess. But a lot of the people in the industry already knew what the problems were. They already knew what many of the solutions probably were. They just needed a forum to be able to talk together. And so that was the opportunity. We talked about the various projects that everybody was concerned about at the time. Some of these came into the Academy Software Foundation, some of them haven't, but these were part of the various topics of talk at the time. We looked at the open source, we looked at the data. It wasn't very pretty. From an open source project perspective, this is not very strong, but this is what it was at the time, and this is why people were bringing us in to help talk about what was going on. We looked at some projects that were actually really struggling at the time, that were really just off a cliff in terms of the development process. And how do we get those back on track? And focused on a few things. One, putting together some CI infrastructure, try to bring some of this together so that people can see how this stuff should be built and that other people could replicate the build process in their internal environments without having to have a magic genie telling them how to do it. Maintainer focus in terms of improving the health of those projects so that there was somebody actually maintaining and working on the project, working on licensing efficiency. A number of challenges back in 2017 where many of the studios and many of the others involved didn't understand how open source licensing worked and what they could do and what they couldn't do. And so we did a little bit of education through that whole process of the attorneys that were at the table as well. And then there's also this community identity. There was no thing to go to. There was no forum that everybody recognized as the place to go and collaborate and work on software together. And these were the challenges at the time. There was a favorable junction of circumstances. Again, we went out and talked to all the leaders. Some of you were in the room. You gave us very good ideas, gave us good feedback. We came back, discussed it with you, the Academy. I saw Andy's in the room. We had very good conversations about how could we put something together that would make it easier for everyone. And that's where the Academy Software Foundation came about. But what it had was it had neutrality, it had open governance, it had IP clarity, it had financial support for some of the tooling and things that the developers needed. It created a forum, some place where people could go and collaborate. And what we've seen over time, over and over again, is that when you give people a neutral forum to collaborate, they do. And so if they, look at, TensorFlow and PyTorch, two very important projects. TensorFlow is controlled. PyTorch decided to open up their governance and make it more neutral outside of Meta. And sure enough, it took off. We see this over and over again. At the Linux Foundation, we host about 1,200 projects in open source now. It is not well beyond just Linux at this point. Harvard studied our projects and said that it provides about $8.8 trillion worth of value to end users to be able to pick up this software, these components, without having to invest a dime. They get access to all this software and all this intellectual property, and they can start to build other things. Many of the companies that you're talking about here or thinking about in terms of AI, their entire stack was probably built on open source. And those companies wouldn't exist if they had to go rebuild operating systems and rebuild everything from scratch all the way down to the bottom. So I went back and I did a data run. I looked at the same type of approach that I used in 2017 to look at the data that was under discussion at the time at the SciTech Council. And sure enough, what showed in my tool that I used to do this is that the number one contributor was unknown. That means that more people have showed up since we did this in 2017 than any company has contributed. And that is a very good statistic. This shows that people did show up. The original contributors to OpenEXR in 2017, who was in my data sets, DreamWorks, Google's, ILM, Machivision, and Sony ImageWorks, and now look who's involved. I looked across Academy Software Foundation. There's a number of companies that some were involved in 2017, but many of these companies joined after you created a forum, a place for people to go. The insights data looks great. We're seeing a lot of stability. This looks very different from the prior chart that was very up and down. If you look at each of the individual projects, you're seeing a very steady growth of contributors year over year. This is a healthy ecosystem. And so now you're at this juncture of circumstances. You have a stable project community. You don't have projects necessarily on life support as much as they were back then. You've got a lot of opportunities on the forefront of what you're doing. And I know everybody wants to talk about AI, but I like to see other opportunities too. There's opportunities in security. I actually just learned that there's 2 security audits going on. That's a great thing. This is what projects, healthy project communities end up doing. They start to focus on other things, security. Dev days, mentoring, bringing new people in becomes important. Training that next generation. Cross collaboration becomes important. I think one of the slides had networking and things. Your slide with the digital studio. We have projects and communities building the networking stack for telcos, cable companies, energy companies. A lot of those communities have already learned how to do those things. Maybe you don't need to have your own Academy software collaboration on a networking stack, but maybe it might be helpful to put together a blueprint of what would be an ideal networking stack for a studio environment. And maybe we have other communities who could collaborate with you and help you figure out how to do that. And then standards. Standards are often becoming a part of what we're doing, as has already been discussed. And here's the stack here. This is very similar to many of our other project communities. Any of our vertical industry communities, whether it's networking, energy, automotive, and so on, they all have a chart like this, which shows what does this look like? And then they layer on what open source projects are out there, a very similar way you're doing it. Which ones should we be working on? What are the next areas that we want to think about is usually the conversations they're having. And so there's opportunities tomorrow. There's a juncture now that includes AI. There is a lot going on that could be the future. The conversations you're having are very similar to other conversations I'm hearing and part of when we've talked to other industries, verticals. The community is going to build AI tools. They're going to build AI, new AI innovations. I think the key question is where do they do that? Do they do it in the Academy Software Foundation? Do they do it outside? Is there something where you want to focus people's attention or give them a forum to have that conversation? I'll also plant a seed, which is that a number of our other communities who have started down an AI journey, especially in the vertical industries, they're talking about data. They're talking about sharing data. We've come up with intellectual property license agreements for data, specifically because we kept getting asked, how should we license data? And the reason they want to do that is they want to also work on taxonomies about data, which we heard as well, in terms of how should we be tagging this data? Can we come up with one format for it so that all the other tooling we have to create can expect a certain format for the data and the metadata around it? These are opportunities that may not involve sharing your intellectual property, your proprietary core data or objects or things that you care about, but how can you start to do these things so that you set up your tool chains, your build pipelines, your workflows, and everything else for success later on? And so I encourage everybody always to think about what's that next generation of projects that people should be working on to do this. And I will say a lot of it is not the sexy AI stuff that people see. You see very, sexy AI videos generated, things like that. And I appreciate all that is possible now. But a lot of our communities, especially in the vertical industries, are starting in boring things. The number one area, process automation and organization. That's not necessarily the sexiest thing, but when you talk to a telecommunications community, they're talking about what are the things that we could do to use AI models in a more optimized way for ourselves. I'm skipping some slides, but There's a project in LF networking I wanted to focus on. This is one of those not sexy types of things. It's how do we move data around, but without PII in it, personally identifiable information. They're starting to share data in the telecommunications industry. Why? They need to be able to train their networks for optimization, for threats, for bad actors. How do you identify them in the data? And in order to share that data, they also need to be able to strip PII out of it. In order to process some of the data according to local regulations, they have to strip PII out of it. And so they're talking about just working on things that will allow them, tooling, that will allow them to pull PII out of their different data streams. And AI tends to be a very good tool to be able to analyze and automatically do a lot of this. And that's one area that they're getting started on. Open source is, I think, inherent in AI. The conversations on AI are always talking about open source because AI is a new technical trend that started in open source. That's where all this is coming from. And so even OpenAI is now saying maybe we did it wrong. Even though their name is OpenAI, they've not been known to be the most open of companies. But again, as a consultant type of engagement that we do often, we come back and we tell you what you already know. But we tell it maybe in a different way, make you think about it a little bit different way. And this is, Rachel, this is what I was talking about before. This is a quote from a 2022 report. And, it exemplifies that there are opportunities here in front of you. You are at a junction of circumstances. You can figure out what the next path is forward, and I hope you can have that debate and find a way to do that. And at the Linux Foundation, we're here to support you. I'm an attorney. We can help you with all the intellectual property challenges or issues you think you may have. We can try to help. We can't solve everything, but we can help bring people to the table and find a solution forward. On the technical side, that's all up to you all. What would help you? Where are your pain points? How can you move forward? And we can help facilitate that in the conversation and neutral forum and see where that goes. So anyways, I'll end there. Hopefully get us back on time. On my way over.
Thank you, Mike. That was fast and good.